Okay, welcome to the Nuvee Club Podcast, Festival Edition, where we highlight the top 10 finalists from Nukhufest. I'm Sanjay, the founder of Nuku, and I'm joined by 2025 finalist Ian Phillips, the director of a short film titled Reconciliation. How are you doing today, Ian?
Good. How are you, Angie?
I'm doing well. I am trying to escape all the loud city noises.
Good luck with that. Yeah, we all are.
I know. So why don't you tell us about your film this year?
Yeah, thank you so much for having us in the festival. We really appreciate it. The short film I made is called Reconciliation. It's a documentary. It is about a young man who is essentially trying to heal himself and his family in the process of becoming a young single father. And it's a film about fatherhood, about parenthood, and three generations of men trying to overcome, I guess, just a lot of trauma, and a lot of obstacles in fatherhood. So yeah, that's essentially what the film is about. There's a component of the film where there's a film within a film because in addition to being a father, he's also a budding filmmaker. So it's kind of an interesting, story within a story about him also making a film about being a father while being in my film, which is about fatherhood. So yeah.
Yeah, it's such an interesting premise and meaningful subject matter. There's a very personal story here that you were able to find. And how did you connect with the star of the film?
Yeah, so Elijah, the subject of the film, he was actually like a former student of mine. My first job out of college, I was teaching a film class, and he was just he was a kid. He was 12 years old, and his mom brought him in for the summer, just looking for something to do. And we struck up a friendship, and I was like in my mid-20s, and he was a lot younger than me. And then we stayed in touch over the years, and then we both kind of became parents at the same time, and then we both became actually like single parents at the same time. So it was just a crazy coincidence that happened, but I think it allowed us to reconnect on a much deeper level. The fact that we were both going through the same thing at the same time. And it's a strange thing when you are like, I wouldn't consider myself a real teacher, right? This was a job I had teaching filmmaking in kind of an after school program, and I wasn't a trained teacher by any means, but it's a strange thing because you watch some of these kids that you consider to be, babies grow up and they become adults. And then you're like, okay, well, what happens to our relationship now that we're peers, essentially. And that's what happened with Elijah and I mean, and also the fact that he became a father so young and he's doing things in a very mature way. It's something that I really admired. And yeah, I mean, kind of, we both went through the same, my story is not the same as his, and it's not even that relevant, but it's just the fact that we both went through, a difficult fatherhood experience at the same time, I think brought us together. And it really wanted me to make a film about him because I'm also making a larger documentary about single fathers, and he's one of the subjects, but I thought that his story in itself could be a really cool self-contained short film. So that's what I did with it, essentially.
Wow. Thank you for that context. That
Yeah.
really helps me understand how the two of you got connected and why you were able to tell a story. So tell me about some of the challenges you guys faced while you were making the film.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a documentary filmmaker mostly, and I've over time, I think, I've learned to kind of make films by myself, which is great in a lot of ways, but it also comes with a lot of challenges. And I love the process of, the kind of films that I make are not things that like, these stories really wouldn't make sense with a crew of 5-10 people, planning everything out and, doing that kind of traditional film shoot, which I'm sure we've all been a part of, right? It's a process of like, having a small camera, doing your own sound, putting a camera in a bag and being willing to kind of travel wherever and whenever to capture your subject doing interesting things that serves your story, So that's always the plus side for me and the biggest challenge, right? Is that I'm by myself in making these films. And you can see it in the film itself that it's very much kind of a run and gun style film, so that is always the challenge. And then, but it also helps in the sense because I also edit. So I know what I'm doing, and, shooting and editing for me are part of the same process because I'm not going to go and shoot 1,000 hours of footage and dump it on another editor. And I know that this is going to be my burden, essentially. So I have to be pretty precious about what I'm doing. And I'm always thinking about, oh, is this going to make sense for me to go out and shoot today? So that's, and, shooting in New York by yourself, like in these kind of, I shot on the trains and, in bowling alleys and for birthday parties. It's always a risk, right? You don't know how people are going to react to you having a camera. And I think most people are pretty good about just minding their own business here, but it is always going to be tricky, right? So that's you know, ultimately the biggest challenge.
Sure, sure, yeah. And despite, I think, some of those challenges, you were still able to make a very compelling visual story. The sound was good, it was crisp, you could hear your subjects. The camera wasn't, found footage style shaking all over the
Yeah, yeah.
place. No, you definitely can see the craft here.
Thank you.
So, do you think that after making this film, that you've changed at all as a person or a filmmaker? Or maybe you can tell us about some of the things you learned after having gone through this experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, every film you make definitely changes you in a certain way. I was able to take this film to, you know, American Black Film Festival, and I was actually part of we won a competition that was sponsored by Walmart and BET actually. So it was before we came to your festival. This was, you know, we're the New York premiere for this festival, but we did have you know, we did have a world premiere in Miami a little while ago, Black Film Festival, and obviously I'm a white person, right? So I think the biggest takeaway for me in this film is like watching Black audiences respond to my film and how do I navigate that Q&A essentially, right? It's sensitive. It's very, very sensitive. And especially like Black fatherhood, right? Like that's a very sensitive subject in the Black community. And I'm a white person and I have to be very careful about how I portray people of color and especially in any circumstance, right? It's always going to be a little bit awkward for a white person to be making films about people that aren't white, right? But especially in the context of Black fatherhood, like I just, you know, being very mindful and thoughtful about the images I'm putting out, the way I'm speaking about the film. And I think that, you know, I learned that there is a level of acceptance that people have for, you know, filmmakers who, you know, you can tell stories that are not about yourself and your, you know, your culture, your whatever, your demographic, but you have to be very just sensitive about what you're doing, you know, and very mindful of that. And the reception has been very strong so far. I don't think anybody's discounted the film because the person who made it is not Black, right? So that's been a nice thing to see for sure.
I appreciate that awareness and that understanding. It's definitely important context as people, watch your film, the subject matter, and then realize who you are as a
Yeah.
filmmaker. So I'm curious, is there anything specific that you want people to take away after having watched your film?
Yeah, I mean, I think the message comes from Elijah, the subject of the film, where he just says, you know, he says that, you know, it is possible to kind of start a new chapter for your family if you want to. And you know, I think that that message of like optimism, especially, you know, in broken families and when there's young children involved is very positive. You know, I think we need more positive stories out there, especially about fatherhood, about single fathers, especially. I didn't think that necessarily this 25-year-old, 26-year-old person would be able to, you know, be a role model for other fathers because he's so young himself. But, you know, his message really is, I think, is extremely strong that like, not only is he healing his son, but he's healing his father too in the process, who wasn't necessarily around from him. And he's saying at the end of the film, I don't want to repeat what my dad did to me, you know? And he's really, and I see a lot of young parents doing that, like and not just, you know, it goes beyond race, right? I think like anybody who has children, if everybody has some level of trauma, right, growing up. And I see a lot of young people just being like, well, I want to do things differently, you know? And that's his message. And I think it's really impacted audiences so far. So
That's amazing, and you're right. I think you've done a really good job at helping to portray that, communicate that story, and it is universal. That message is universal beyond race, beyond ethnicity, culture. So, congrats on doing that.
thank you.
I'm I'm curious, how do you see the landscape now in terms of opportunities for independent filmmakers?
Man, that's a tough one. You know, man, I would love to ask you that question at some point because I think it's really up to people like you, right? Who are, you know, filmmakers themselves, but also entrepreneurs. And you have a film festival and you're doing things a little bit differently to build a platform for indie filmmakers. I think that filmmakers are going to do what they have to do regardless, right? Like if you love filmmaking, you're going to find a way to do it regardless of where it ends up, you know? I think it is a mess right now. It's really difficult because there's just so much out there in terms of there's so many films being made. Filmmakers are now competing with cell phones and social media, and that's where the majority of the audiences have gone. You know, TV is streaming is huge now. So like people like me who grew up with like, a kind of a rigid traditional view of film, which is like, okay, you go to the movie theater, you watch a 90-minute, 2-hour movie, that's kind of died out, right? Like, especially in documentary, like the kind of documentaries I wanted to make and I loved growing up are not in fashion anymore. They're just not. If it's not true crime, if it's not like a biopic of a celebrity, if it's not something crazy, provocative, politics, right? It's just not going to get the same, an audience anymore. And it is really a sad state for people that, miss kind of the golden era, but you really have to adapt or die, right? And I try to look at the positive of everything where, my skills as a documentary filmmaker have helped me maintain a career in the industry, mostly as an editor. But, I'm always conscious that like I'm not doing this for a paycheck, right? Especially making documentaries. Like you're never going to be able to, it's I'm not going to say never. I think there's a select few filmmakers who have been able to make a career out of making the documentaries that they want. But I think it comes with a lot of compromise and, and just a lot of flexibility to be able to make the art that you want to make now, because yes, you can get into great film festivals, but it's very hard to find an audience beyond that. And for me, I don't necessarily, for me, film festivals are my audience. Like I love that, right? Luckily, my films have been the two feature films I've made have gotten distribution, small distribution, but I love film festivals so much that even if that was the end point for me, I would still do this because that's my audience and that's what I love. But I do think that filmmakers have to use their skills to do other things at this point because I think it's extremely difficult to make a career out of just filmmaking. And I know you know that too, because you're a multi-hyphenate, a multidisciplinary guy.
Absolutely. You have to be a multi-hyphenate, at least in terms of branding yourselves and communicate the value you can offer. I think it's a very, very accurate assessment of the industry today. And I would agree that having an optimistic outlook, trying to believe that you're going to do whatever it takes to make it happen is the right way. We will figure out how along the way to support the culture. And I think really that's going to come down to a grassroots effort of people in community finding the films
Yeah.
organically through people, not necessarily through algorithms or machines, but through things like film festivals. They'll have to adapt, but things like what we're doing at Nukhufest, I think, will help.
Absolutely. What you're doing is amazing. And any opportunity that filmmakers have to show their film, both online and in person is huge nowadays, right? So yeah, thank you for that. And, I do want to stress the importance of doing things in person because as you know, like, I, we live for that feeling, right? I don't think, if you're of a certain age, that like as a filmmaker, like that's the feeling that you want, right? That's the high that you get for all the struggle, which is being in a room full of people, whether it's a movie theater or an event space or whatever, and watching people watch what you do, what you've done, in real time and reacting to it. There's nothing like that feeling, right? For me, that feeling will always be the high that I'm constantly chasing. And it might come once every 6 months or once a year, but like that will always be the thing that drives me, right? Which is I want to share my work with people in a real space in real time on a big screen. And if they react the way that I want them to react, and I have enough juice to go out and do it again. So
Absolutely. Well, we're excited to see you in person and to screen your film in person at Nuku in the coming weeks. So tell us, Ian, what you're working on next. What's the next project you got going on?
yeah, like I said, I've expanded this short film into a feature that has four other fathers in it, and it's a very difficult film because it's dealing with fathers who have custody issues, and it's of children, so it's probably the toughest subject matter I've ever had. I'm very close to finishing the edit. I really hope that this will be my next documentary. I'm a little bit, I've never dealt with such touchy subject matter before, so I don't know what it's going to be like when I put this thing out there. And I'm excited, I'm nervous at the same time. It's difficult, right? But it's definitely the most personal film I've ever made. And then I'm also working on a friend's fiction narrative film that's shooting, next month. Yeah, I don't know. I want to keep making documentaries. I would like to try doing some fiction. I have an idea for a film, but yeah, that's basically it. It's just a lot of ideas, but I have a lot of footage for different projects, and it's just about seeing them through. Hopefully, some way, I found a way to work that works for me, and I think it will serve me for the rest of my life as long as I'm making films. I will always enjoy the process of making a documentary every few years by myself with a lot of footage and editing it by myself, and that will always be something that I think will keep sustaining me. So yeah.
That's awesome, and you're a true filmmaker. You're carrying the spirit of filmmaking alive, and all of that sounds very compelling. So I'm excited to see how it is released and how it manifests into the world.
Thank you.
Is there anything else that you wanted to add for our viewers before we wrap up? So where to find you, how to get in touch?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Ian New York with one N. And yeah, my website is ianfilmsnyc.com. Yeah, I really appreciate Nuku Festival for having us. We look forward to seeing you in person in a couple weeks. And yeah, I hope people like the film. I really do. So thank you so much.
All right, be sure to watch and vote for reconciliation on nuku.com. Follow Ian Phillips to learn more about his upcoming projects, and we'll see you at Nukhufest. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.